Okay, so I am Miles Orkin. I'm an Aquarius. I like puppies and hot chocolate and long walks on the beach. That has no relevance to my presentation. Sometimes I do this as a longer workshop. I work at Google. I have been, up until today, chief of staff for G Suite UX, so all the giant G Suite family of products. And I used to be chief of staff in search and maps, and I'm moving to the ads. I like to move around to all the complicated, ambiguous problems. I do a lot of stuff about helping design teams thrive, helping them build the skills. Who here went to some form of higher education to help teach them some aspect of the work that they do today? So maybe you went to design school or whatever. Did they teach you in school how to present things to senior stakeholders? No, well, you're not in your head. That's got a few people, maybe. Maybe if you got an MBA, maybe. But generally, they don't teach people this stuff, but it's super important to do your job well. And it's so painful if you mess up or if you miss the boat or something. So I do a lot around this like peripheral skill development. I think it's super important, and it can really help you feel competent and help you succeed. You're already good at the core competency that you have. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be employed here in the South Bay in Silicon Valley. But when you're presenting, sometimes it's really like, it's not really like this monumental thing. You feel more like Jeff Spicoli, just to continue on the like teen films from the 80s and 90s after Bill and Ted. So it can feel like this when you're presenting to a senior stakeholder or an executive stakeholder or whatever. So I ran some panels about this to help teams, get some people who are pretty experienced to talk about like, what are your secrets? What are your tips? And then from those panels, we've built out kind of a framework. So I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, but it's a pretty straightforward framework for how you can manage your approach to engaging senior stakeholders. Some of the stuff might be really obvious. Hopefully everyone's going to have at least one or two things that's like, oh man, yeah, okay, I got it. Because this is not like, there's no right way to do this, but the mistake people make is they approach a lot of the work that they do really systematically. You'll do like foundational research and iterate on all kinds of sketches and mocks and wireframes, but the amount of like sort of structural thinking or methodical thinking you put into presenting is often not so much. And this is not really about what to put in the deck. It's about like the social engineering that goes behind the deck. So this is to help you think more strategically about presenting. So it breaks down it's this straightforward. There are 3 pillars to our framework. Say less, say yes, don't stress. It's easy. When you're talking to the VP of product for your company and showing the mocks of the things that they haven't seen yet, it's no big deal. Don't worry about it. Just kidding. But these are the words that can really help you get through these things. You have to recontextualize the whole experience in your own head to have more impact with the people you're talking to. So we're going to go through this quickly, and hopefully we'll have time to answer some questions. I'm looking at the clock now to keep myself sort of on track. A wise person once said that the ability to simplify means to eliminate the unnecessary so that the necessary may speak. I think that's kind of a funny quote because it's actually really wordy. So my way of saying it is less but good beats more but meh. You want to put the right stuff in your presentation, but what you think is the right stuff is not exactly always what the stakeholder thinks is the right stuff. And that's one of the most important parts about this. So when we talk about saying less, it's not just about literally saying less, it's really saying the right things and not the wrong things. So how do you do it? You think about a few, you break it down yet again to a framework within the framework. This is alliteration that helps. Audience, altitude, and attitude. Those 3 things. So who is your audience? Who are you presenting to? Knowing what your audience is helps you calibrate what is the altitude that I need to be at here. Does a VP of product really care what the acronym was when we started the project, how many studies we've done up till now, what the results of some of those were, and when no, they do not care. They don't care about anything that happened before yesterday, generally speaking. They want to know what you're doing, what's happening next, and what you're asking them to respond to. So let's talk a little more about your audience, how you sort of understand your audience. You can't go ask a VP of product. I'm just using that as that's our representative example. You cannot go, generally speaking, unless maybe if you're in a smaller company, you can. In a big, medium or big, you can't say, hey, I'm, Sally Rogers, I'm presenting to you, you're the VP of product. Oh, how do you like to get decks? Can I spend half an hour just asking you like how you prefer to get you? You probably can't ask that question. So you have to figure out what it is they like, what they don't like. Sometimes you're presenting to a senior stakeholder with regularity. Sometimes it's the first time you've ever presented to this person. You have to do your homework, and doing your homework means you can't necessarily talk to them, but you can probably talk to people who know them. So maybe your manager talks to them a lot more than you do. Maybe it's like 2 levels up from you. So maybe someone that on your team, maybe I always tell people, always make good friends with, at Google, they call it the ABP, the executive assistant. Never, ever piss those people off. Always be their friend. They're busy, they're hairy, their job's complex, but if they know you and like you, they will give you all kinds of inside information. Program managers, all the people who make all the gears turn, know them and help them with things, and they will tell you things you need to know. That's part of doing your homework. And also, put yourself in their shoes means, okay, those stakeholders, whether it's 1 or 3 or whatever, they're context switching all day long. The thing that's momentous to you, the half hour that you have with them, that you and your team have worked on this deck for 2 weeks, it's just 30 minutes in a day of 6 other things, one after the other. So you have to understand that and be cognizant of that, and listen more. And by listen more, I mean, the one that when you're presenting to really senior people, you feel like you don't have access to them directly, but the one thing you do have access to is all the things that they present to you at the team, at the big meetings, at the all hands or stand-ups. And a lot of times they actually work really hard on that material, because if they're presenting at a quarterly all hands talking about product strategy, they probably have worked even harder on that stuff than you have on this. Make sure you listen and are able to reiterate something back. Like, I really liked what you said in the Q1 kickoff about, getting our users connected. And I think that this relates to that. Like right there, that's a huge technique. So listening is watching what they write, listening to what they say in talks, listening to what your CEO says, all these higher level things. When they understand that you're paying attention to that stuff, they're like, okay, this person gets it. They're not just in their little like make it pretty world or whatever. Like there are a lot of stereotypes that business owners have about UX and design, and you have to sort of overcome that by showing, no, I get you. I hear you. What I do? Okay. So altitude. So we did audience. Altitude is this. You're like, we are ready to start this project. We're so stoked. We're ready to dive in. We're going full speed, full tilt. This is great. I can't wait to talk about it to our stakeholder. Your manager's like, okay, the team is all buckled up. I think we're ready. I think they're all lined up. They're ready to start executing. It's awesome. And the executive is like, is this a no parking zone? Where can I park the Lexus or the what's the electric one? The Tesla. Yeah, that one. I'm not very up on these things. So anyway, this is the problem. If you are thinking the stuff that's super important in your world every day may or may not be important to executives. So you have to figure out what is. And if you don't, that's where the problems start. I have seen so many presentations where either people go way back in what to them is like, this is so important because they have to know that we started here and we had this concept, and then we pivoted to this other concept. And then, like, no, they don't care. They just show me what it looks like now and where you're trying to get it to. Another one people do is they start using all the terminology of the product, all the real specific things. Like they don't know, like you're deep under the hood of the admin console. They're trying to run the whole product. They don't know these acronyms you're using. Be careful about that. And I always tell people, if you're working on content for executives, the best way to develop the content is you get an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and a box of crayons, and you write the content in crayons on the paper. And if it doesn't all fit, then it's too much content. Because they don't want to read. You might do something that's a leave behind and have it like, well, if you want to see more, look at the appendix, all the charts are in there. But you don't want to have you're not reading the Gettysburg Address to these people. They have a very short attention span and they want to get to the chase. And then there's your attitude. That is very important too. Who does it better than the New York Dolls, right? You need to say the right things, like I said, and I'm going to keep it moving quickly here. You also want to be clear about what you need. So you're not there because, hey, let's just have a chat, or you're also not clear to, generally with someone above like a director and above, you don't want to go to them with open-ended problems and say, what should we do? We're not sure. You want to tell them, this is what we're working on. This is the problem. We need you to approve it. We want you to choose one of these 3 options. We want you to give us money so we can keep doing this. Whatever it is, you need to know what it is you want them to do, how you want them to respond, and tell them that really clearly. And take it seriously. So you don't want, I have made this mistake. I'm a kind of a lighthearted guy, you might tell, but I have done this presenting to a bunch of VPs for a big company where I'm like cracking jokes and like using all this tech terminology. This was at a big nonprofit. And later I was like, I just blew it completely. They didn't fund my project. I totally blew it because I was like way too flippant and silly. So you want to make sure you have gravitas. And the thing is, you're not there because you walked through the door and they didn't kick you out. You're there because they asked you to be there. You got the opportunity to speak because some people up and down the food chain decided, hey, this is the person who should talk about this topic. You are there for a reason. You need to believe in yourself and be convincing about it. That doesn't mean you need to act like you have all the answers, and I'll talk more about that more. You want to guide them, and basically you want to say, this is what I tell people. You start your presentation and you tell them what you're expecting from them. We're going to present some stuff to you. We really need you to make a decision about whether we go one direction or the other. Then you tell them what you're going to tell them. Okay, so we're going to show you the last round of designs. Then we're going to show you the 2 options and some results from our initial feedback surveys to help you calibrate your decision. Then you tell them the actual things. Then at the end, you tell them what you told them and what you want again. So you say, okay, so we just showed you those designs. Now it's time to really dig in and ask questions and make your decision. And they need a lot of signposts along the way because, again, they are coming into this totally cold. And you can be 4 slides in, and if they didn't do a pre-read or anything like that, they're like, wait, what are we again? What are the sections of this thing? Like, it's good to put signpost again. Say yes. So say yes means whatever they tell you to do, just do it. Don't ask questions. No, I'm kidding. That's the worst thing. That happens all the time, though. Like, you'll see stuff like the VP says, oh, why did you make that button blue? And then a week later, the whole design team is like, so-and-so hates blue. Make everything green. They don't like blue. Like, don't take them literally. Never take an executive literally. They don't speak. They're figurative. They're conceptual. They're strategic. But always be optimistic. Always be open to possibilities. Be confident. Say yes. Say, okay, I see where you're going with that. We really chose to take a different direction because we thought it through. And sorry, I'm being facetious, but yeah, we can look into that and we can explore. Another thing is, oh, good point. You somehow found the one error in our whole page, in our whole sort of set of numbers that we've been working on for a month, and you found it in five minutes. Great. Yes, we'll fix it. No worry, we'll get back to you. Things about saying yes. So one is be the host. So this means you want to create a positive, productive, meaningful, optimistic experience. Some of that is the content that you deliver, but it's amazing that people they'll sweat blood over the deck or over like certain words or the right picture, but then they'll show up in the conference room will be like a mess, or they don't care. Like, think about where people are sitting. Make sure that the most important person isn't sitting across from the window in the afternoon when the sun's shining right in their eyes. When they show up, welcome them. Say hello. It's good to see you. Make a little small talk. Don't sit there. Oh, hi. Oh, yeah. Okay. you're the host. When it's your stuff, you are the host of the party and you're there for a reason. Have a point of view. It's really, leaders want you to have a point of view. They don't want to have to do that for you. Their job is to decide things, not to tell you how you feel. What they want is give me a crisp point of view so I can then decide and say, no, I disagree. You can convince me or you can just go option B right now. That's their job, is to decide, it's not to do. But they come, like at Google, they come from a background of doing. So you want to be careful about triggering the fixer. So like what you don't want to do is leave stuff open and they say, oh, well, what if you tried like moving that thing over there? Or what if you made the picture bigger and the word smaller? You don't want to let them do that. And if they start doing that, you want to say things like, okay, great. That's a great suggestion. We'll get back to you. You know, like don't let them start fixing. And therefore don't show them like lots of open-ended problems. And bad is good when you're dealing with ongoing relationships with senior people. Holding back on bad news is a really bad idea, even if it's painful when you share it, because they hate surprises and they always get the bad news. And they're like, why didn't you tell me this earlier? You need to share it. The stumper is like, if they do ask you a question you can't answer, another common mistake is you are an authority on the subject matter, but you're not, that doesn't mean you know everything about it. And if they ask you a question that you can't really answer, trying to pretend you know the answer executives got to where they are because they're really good bullshit detectors. They will know that you're trying to pull one over on them. They also know when you try to throw someone under the bus. Oh, well, we tried to get that information, but, you know, the customer insights team just wasn't, you know, we put the ticket in. We have never, always own all the, my opinion is always own all the blame. In presentations to executives, own it all yourself. Later, they'll find out it wasn't really your fault and they'll be like, wow, that was really solid, man. Like they just owned it, you know? It's never good to try and sketch out on those things. Finally, there's more there, but we'll keep going. Finally, don't stress. It's easy. It's fine. It's fun. It's fun to do this stuff. You were never in control anyway. And it's true. You can only control the experience that you create and the story that you tell. Every story has three parts. There's the person, there's the storyteller, there's the story, and there's the listener. And the listener interprets the story in however way they choose to interpret it. You can't actually, just like after you do it, you see this in like a post-design review thing with an executive, people do all this, and they do it before too, all this like executive mind reading. Oh, but I know, but so-and-so, that last time they said they didn't want this, and I don't think they like this. You never really know. You have to you have to have some instinct about this stuff. So, but also think of it like a performance. I think Google like has all these people who are really smart, really academically successful people. So they've all gotten advanced degrees and passed all these tests. Presenting is not a test. It's more like a performance. If you go see a band and the band is perfect, it's boring. It's Milli Vanilli. It's like lip syncing. If you go see a band, you're not quite sure, but then they drop the needle on the record. It's like that's really exciting. And so you can have a little flexibility when you present. Look people in the eye. Don't look at your laptop. Sit up straight. If it's in a meeting, if you're standing, smile. You should convey a sense of, I'm happy to be here. I'm excited about this. I'm inside, you're nervous. I do a whole other workshop on like how to handle your body and your brain and your breath. But essentially, just try to make sure you breathe. Just making sure that you are breathing is really helpful. It's amazing how little you can breathe when you get into these presentation things and how bad that can affect your performance. Ask questions. If it does seem to be like dragging, like ask, hey, is this making sense? How are you feeling about this? And practice. That means, and practice isn't just, a lot of times people say they're practicing, but they're really just planning. Like, oh, we should move this, or we should add more words here. Practicing is actually talking through your slides, pretending. And I tell people to do visualization too. Just visualize yourself. Close your eyes. Do it in the shower. Do it on the bus. That really helps put you in the context, and you start to sort out what works and what doesn't. You want to have good social intelligence, which means, dig around a little bit, find out from other people who've presented to this person, what drove them crazy. They always ask, do they read the pre-read or do they not read the pre-read? Will they let you go through the slides? A lot of times they don't let you go through the slides. They're like, I read, let's go straight to slide 13. I want to know what's the bottom line, and you can often plant the seeds early, maybe not with that stakeholder, but with their people. Like, hey, we're going to be showing this new idea. I want to show it to you now. I'm going to give you a sneak peek. What do you think? Could you make sure you give the thumbs up in that meeting? There's a lot of ways you can do stuff. You never want to walk in feeling the ideal presentation to stakeholders is it's practically a foregone conclusion because you've done so much espionage and tilling of the fields. And then, yes, you want to be ready. They are going to catch the one thing you missed. They're going to ask the question you can't answer. So know what's comfortable and when you have to say, I'm not sure. We're just going to get back to you. I have no clue. That's such a good question. That's why you're the boss. Thank you. I'll get back to you. Getting supporters who will be in the room to say things. Sometimes at Google, you present remotely. So if you're presenting over video conference, I tell people, get yourself in a good conference room. Never present anything from your laptop ever to a stakeholder because it's like, especially if you're like my age, because then it's like, oh, he's got a goiter. And then get someone in the room who's like, hey, who could be pinging you on the Slack channel. We're like, dude, you gotta speed it up. They're looking out the window and also can advocate for you. And know the things that you're not good at. If you're like, I always screw up the numbers, get someone else to do the numbers or something, or get someone else to do the pictures if you're good at the research report. Figure that out in advance. There it is in a nutshell. 3 simple steps. You're all gonna crush it at your next presentation. That's it. Thank you very much.
Hello. All right, there we go. Hi, everyone. Who here thinks they're dyslexic? Raise your hand. Yeah, I know you are. How many people have been officially diagnosed with dyslexia? Okay, a few less. Well, that would make sense because only 2% of people with dyslexia have actually been officially diagnosed. So that means 98% of people out there who have dyslexia haven't gone through the proper testing, probably have struggled a little bit more than they realize, or maybe they just don't know and they're like, why can't I get this? Why can't I get this word down? And that's a big deficit, right? That's a problem going on. And I hope after this talk, if you feel like you might be dyslexic, maybe you dig a little bit into it. If you know someone who's dyslexic, the last time I did this talk, some people came up to me. I was like, my child or my brother or sister, I think they have dyslexia. What do we do? And I suggested going and getting tested. So, come to me afterwards if you have questions about maybe being dyslexic. So a little bit about myself. Right now I'm a designer, but back in the day I was a young girl, blonde, not teal. So at this point in time, I was 3 years old. I was in preschool, and we were learning the alphabet, which is a big deal back then, right? But I couldn't retain it for the life of me. I always had to sing it to the song. I always skipped the letter N. And I would remember it one day, and then the next I would completely forget what I was trying to do. So my teacher here, Miss Diana, she sat my mother down one day, and she told her that that I might have a learning disability and that I should get tested. And it took a couple of years because they don't actually test you when you're in preschool, which is unfortunate. And then eventually I actually did get to go to a hospital up in Dallas, Texas, and do a full day of testing. They do a IQ test, they do some puzzle tests, some auditory, verbal, and hearing tests. And at the end of the day, we discovered that I had a pretty high IQ, but I had a 20% difference in my reading level compared to my age group. And that's when I was officially diagnosed with dyslexia, and my whole world changed. So this wasn't actually a big surprise to my mom because she also was dyslexic, and her father was dyslexic, and I'm sure one of his parents, my great-grandparents, were dyslexic as well because dyslexia is hereditary, along with a very round face and long nose. So German descent. So because my mom struggled through her, years in school with dyslexia, she knew that the only way that I was going to fully bloom into the woman I was supposed to be was to get the proper education, have the right support system around me, have great teachers, and also be encouraged to explore your creative side. Creativity is often associated with dyslexia, which we'll get into momentarily, and it definitely helps you when you feel like you're kind of slacking at everything else or not doing as well to feel like you're doing really great in another way. So I learned to flourish, and I also learned to learn differently. And at the end of the day, you know, dyslexia I still have, you never lose it. However, I've learned to kind of shift the way that I approach things, but it was still a struggle. So throughout school, well, first off, I was held back in kindergarten. I did kindergarten twice. Very exciting. Every year I had to tell teachers that I was dyslexic. So I had to bring a note from a doctor. I had to present it. It was always very awkward. I had to explain that I needed extended time on tests, that I needed every book that we were going to read on tape, and that I needed to go to special education classes for extended time on tests or in order to practice reading away from the main classroom. So this is my story of dyslexia. Everyone has a bit of a different story because dyslexia also kind of ranges depending on who you are. And it can be very strong in some people. You can be affected by different things. So let's get into that. So 20% of people, in America at least, are said to be affected by dyslexia. So that means 1 in 5 people. So let's see what it's kind of like to have dyslexia. I'm going to give you a moment to try to read this. When I read this, I get really nervous because I've already forgot like the last words I read when I'm trying to figure out what the first one is. So this is very frustrating, right? It's angering and it's just a lot to look at. So this is what it's like in the mind of a dyslexic who's trying to read. And it doesn't just affect reading, it can also affect your writing, it can affect math, all those things can be a real struggle. But it isn't correlated to IQ, which is really important to keep in mind. In fact, people like Albert Einstein, he was dyslexic, and we all know he was a very successful theoretical physicist. It's also the name of my dog because I was always really inspired by Albert Einstein. My mom told me that he was dyslexic, and I kind of latched on to that being a young kid trying to get past the challenges that you face with it. And knowing that he was super successful made me feel like, you know what, I can be too. In fact, 40% of self-made millionaires are dyslexic. So that was another very helpful stat to find out. So people like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Steven Spielberg, Cher, Tom Cruise, and Walt Disney, they all had or have dyslexia. So clearly it's not a lack of intelligence holding people like this back. So what exactly is dyslexia then? It has nothing to do with IQ, but it still affects your reading and your writing and your math. Like what's going on in the brain, right? So our brains, much like all of us as individuals, are different. It all ranges on the spectrum. It's called neurodiversity. So every brain in this room is made up just a little bit differently. And we all just think a little bit differently. That's why we have different personalities, why we have different styles, why some of us have accents. I have a y'all, very strong y'all from Texas. So, and that's just what it is. Dyslexia is just that. It's just a different way of thinking. So a lot of people associate dyslexia with seeing letters or numbers flipped and flopped and backwards, right? So this D looks like a B and a P and a Q, 9, whatever your brain wants it to be. That same, it happens with full numbers. It happens with full words. So being dyslexic, you actually would still see this the same exact way with your eyes. But what's actually happening is your brain is struggling to manipulate these shapes and decode what you're reading. So our brains is what's switching and mirroring and rotating the letters. So let's dig a little deeper into that. So here's an example. When you see this coffee cup and you flip it and you rotate it and you mirror it, it still has the same meaning. It's still a cup of coffee. But when you come to see the letter B and you flip it and mirror it and do all the fancy things to it, it suddenly has a billion different meanings. And this is where the brain starts to struggle. And diving a little bit deeper into that, the reason this is happening is because of the way our brains are, I guess, formed. So in the left hemisphere, this is for processing language and reading. And the right hemisphere handles spatial awareness, creativity, art, music, all that fun stuff. And for the sake of lack of there of words, a regular brain or a normal brain. When you're reading, the thoughts of what you're reading are going to the back left side of your brain where language and reading and all that stuff is supposed to go immediately. But instead, for a dyslexic, it goes to the front right side of the brain. So to that creative, spatial awareness, artsy side of the brain, which is takes a little bit of time. It goes on a detour, right? Until it gets to the right section. So that means it takes a little bit of a longer trip to get to the place it's supposed to be. And that's why it can take up to 3 times longer for someone with dyslexia to read. And it also causes plenty of stress and fatigue and frustration. So what once used to be us struggling with reading books and articles that are like printed has now carried over to the digital space, right? So text-based long-form writing or reading platforms like Medium and blogs and news websites and book apps, this is where it can be a real struggle for someone with dyslexia to go into those apps and actually use them efficiently. So now that we have a better understanding of what exactly dyslexia is, let's kind of explore some very simple ways to design better for dyslexia. So first things first, let's talk about those letters, those pesky letters. So first things, typography. There are some typefaces out there that are specifically made for dyslexia. However, there have been some other studies that kind of disprove that those might work or not, or at least they're not any better than a regular sans serif font. So what I suggest is using a sans serif font with plenty of leading, has long ascenders and descenders, very distinct characters, and maybe even offering alternative typefaces. Because at the end of the day, you can't please everyone. And it might just be more helpful to provide options to change the text that's being shown opposed to only sticking to one, right? And then, of course, again, this is all long form stuff, but don't use all caps, don't use italics. Try to avoid underlining. Don't do fancy things of centering or right justifying stuff. When these are like loads of paragraphs and pages and chapters of information, and when you're doing really fancy styling to things, it's very distracting, especially for someone who's already struggling so much to read the words. Next is content. So again, try to be clear and concise. Keep the line length short and appropriate, 45 to 100 characters. Reinforce with icons and visual aids. So giving graphs or pictures that are associated to what you're writing about are super helpful because things just click a lot faster with someone who's dyslexic, and I'm sure anyone, honestly. And then, of course, with that said, don't overwhelm people with too much information. So there's a balance, of course. You don't want to go too crazy with all the images in the world or all the text in the world, right? You don't want a wall of text. That's just very off-putting. Next is legibility. So you don't want to use pure black on a pure white background. Try to make it kind of subtle, right? Use a little bit of gray like I'm doing here. Try to avoid using images that have text in them. You want to make sure that everything is accessible, not just for the regular accessibility standards, but also for people who are dyslexic. We often use text readers because we like to have it read it to us. Honestly, it's just easier. So making sure that whatever you're designing is using the appropriate header tags and div tags so that the text reader can follow along with it. Outside of text, there are a few things that are very frustrating as a dyslexic. So one of them is CAPTCHAs. We've all faced this moment where we're like, what is that? And I already struggle with letters. So then manipulating them even more, oh my God, you've lost me. So I constantly am hitting that refresh until there's something that I understand. So instead of doing something like this, I suggest using something very simple, just the check mark that says that you're not a robot. And if you really want to push it, maybe the one with the images, but we all struggle with those too, because you don't know where the car is. Like, is it in that other square too? Secondly, optimize your search capabilities. I can't tell you how often I go to Google just to figure out how to spell a word. I'm like, I know it has a B and a G in it, so hopefully it can tell me the right word. But there's other applications out there that don't make suggestions or autocorrect things, and those are really important, especially when you're dyslexic and you already struggle to spell things. So make sure that you're not relying on accurate spelling. Use autocorrect, provide suggestions, and you will win the heart of every designer in the room. And lastly, stop it with the time limits. First off, this is a dark pattern and it frustrates me and I understand it at times. You're going and you're buying concert tickets and then suddenly you have to fill out this long form with all these questions and you have 5 minutes to do it. So as someone who's dyslexic, I'm already going to misspell probably all the words that I'm putting into this field. And then I don't have any extended time. So I might just lose those tickets I wanted to Coldplay. It's a shame. So instead of doing that, maybe offering the ability to extend the time or just remove the time limit. All right. So I hope today you learned a little bit about what dyslexia really is. It really is just a different way of thinking. And I hope it's something that you consider when you're trying to make things more accessible to everyone, right? I know it's a nuanced part of accessibility, but when you have an application that might have an audience that are dyslexics, I strongly encourage you to take some of these really easy, simple steps to making it more accessible to everyone. Thank you.
So, hi, I'm Nina Krishnan. I'm the Chief Product Officer of a Brooklyn-based startup called Equity. And we're what you call an anti-poverty startup. So we actually work in the social impact tech space. I joined Equity about 2 years ago as the first design hire. So I was sort of a full stack designer doing everything and anything. I even did some, marketing work and some sales work and just basically anything you could think of. And today, 2 years later, I actually run a 7-person multidisciplinary diverse design team. And today I'm going to be sharing some of our key learnings from the past few years designing products for financially vulnerable populations. And I'm hoping to also equip you all with some, actionable techniques that you can take back to your own organizations in order to create more equitable design processes. So we build tools to empower financially vulnerable populations, specifically college students. That's right, college students. So every year, 3 million students drop out of college due to a time-sensitive financial crisis of less than $500. Oh, is there a clicker? There we go. Of less than $500. 50% of college students will experience housing and or food insecurity while they're in school. And we define food insecurity as the state of being without reliable access to sufficient quantity of affordable, nutritious food. And we define housing insecurity as it's an umbrella term, basically, that encompasses several dimensions of housing problems that people may experience, including affordability, safety, quality, insecurity, and loss of housing. So meet Alicia Pruitt. A few months ago, The Atlantic did a piece on a school in Texas called Amarillo College. And in that piece, they highlighted Alicia Pruitt. She's a 44-year-old mother of 6. Prior to enrolling at Amarillo College, she was a stay-at-home mom. And before that, she was at Comcast as a customer service rep. She decided to enroll at Amarillo College and was hoping to get a degree in communications, hoping that she could one day do PR for an adoption agency or foster agency. But really the main goal was to give her kids a better life. Not long after Pruitt started school, her husband, Mike, fell out of work. The couple started falling behind on their bills. Alicia started going to the campus food pantry and eventually was able to access emergency funds through her college to cover half of the month's rent and some utility bills. They ended up getting on the wait list for a Section 8 housing program that provided affordable rentals to college students and families. Once they got the offer, a few months later, as they waited, they got an offer, and as they waited to actually move into their new rental, they were evicted from their place. And so this happened about 3 days before they were to move into their new housing. So they started looking for shelter beds for the family, but unfortunately none of the shelters could offer space for a family of 7. So today, this is the reality for millions of college students. While conversations and concerns over the rising cost of higher ed tend to focus on ballooning tuition, it's often the small, unexpected, and overlooked factors like a missed utility bill, a car repair, an unexpected doctor visit that can derail a student's plan to complete their studies. So let's talk a little bit about Equity, my startup. So as a product and service, Equity is a holistic financial success platform aimed at helping students navigate basic needs challenges and to overcome financial emergencies and ultimately to stay in school. Now, as a company, Equity is a group of individuals committed to narrowing gaps in post-secondary education and helping students realize social and economic justice. Today, I'm going to share some of our design team's findings and how we're able to leverage design as a driver for social change. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is moving, fast and slow. So how we use design tools, iterative processes, and participatory prototyping to quickly translate research insights into on-the-ground experiences that can be tested and refined. So designing better products through co-creation. What is co-creation? It's basically bringing the people we're designing for into the process. And so how does this differ from traditional design research and processes? In traditional design research, we're hearing their voices. In participatory design, we're empowering them to make alongside us. And so how does this benefit your team and organization? Well, we found that, our users would rather implement ideas that they created themselves than anything, as opposed to anything we designed behind closed doors, no matter how beautiful or perfect we thought it was, because people adopt the change that they're a part of making. And beyond that, you'll also gain valuable insight into all facets of your solution. So what did we do? We ran co-creation exercises. So this was 2 years ago. It was a year ago, actually. It was this summer. And the sort of business goal was to design a product for the college market. And our assumption was that it was going to be a financial tool, a money management tool. We thought that the fundamental issue was that students didn't know how to manage their money. So we decided, okay, let's take a step back and let's run some co-creation sessions. Our goal was to better understand points of frustration and friction during the college journey and to identify where and how we could deliver value. So we conducted about 10 to 15 sessions with traditional and non-traditional students. Traditional students are sort of what you probably think of when you think of a college student, someone who went to college right out of high school. But we also wanted to think about designing for the margins. So we invited non-traditional students into our process. Non-traditional students are students like Alicia. So student parents, adult learners, part-time students, and first-generation students. And our goal was to really kind of understand what need looked like for different types of students and where we could ultimately deliver value. So we conducted remote sessions, we had students invite us into their homes, and we spoke to students on college campuses. What we did. So we did journey mapping exercises. We let students, the student experts, that's what we call them, map their current experiences, including pain points, frustrations, challenges, and areas for opportunity. And then we conducted opportunity identification exercises. So participants were prompted to use the journey maps that they had created to think about opportunities or situations where they feel like things could have gone differently in their college journey. We also did something that we called triangulation of insights, which is basically just using more than one method to collect data on the same topic. So we used diary studies. We tracked behaviors and emotional states over a period of time. We did some contextual interviews, and we did some behavioral mapping. And here's what we found. We were wrong. Students didn't need a money management tool. The problem wasn't that they weren't managing their money. The problem was that they didn't have enough. It was fundamental insolvency. We also found that stress usually peaked around the end of the semester when finances were the tightest. We found that our users had limited bandwidth and operated with a scarcity mindset, which basically means that they never had enough. And they felt like they never had enough, and they operated as if they wouldn't have enough, and they didn't know where their next meal would come from. And this all affected how they sort of interacted with the digital world. And they also had a multitude of bandwidth taxes, right? Cognitive bandwidth taxes. So they had their academics, they had their finances, they had their families to support. And they were using resources. So when I say resources, I mean anything on and off campus. So think food pantries, childcare, subsidized childcare, government benefits, to build financial capacity. So as I mentioned, the issue wasn't that they weren't managing their money, it was that they didn't have enough. And so we realized that we needed to build a product that helps users, our students, build financial capacity. And so in these conversations with students, we found that they would actually work these resources into their budgeting framework. So in their monthly budget, instead of setting aside $200 for groceries, they would use a local food pantry where they would get their groceries for free. And so some gaps that we identified. So there was no single dedicated, reliable source of information for students who are homeless or living in poverty. It's almost impossible to navigate the patchwork of social services, both on campus and off campus. And people really struggle to get matched with the right resources at the right time. As I mentioned, these are students with limited bandwidth. And the problem was that at times when they needed the resource the most, at the end of the month, when they had no more food, when they needed to find that food pantry that they had heard about through a counselor months ago, they didn't know where to find it. They couldn't remember the name. And so we realized that we needed to, take all of this into consideration in designing a product that truly met their needs. Some other takeaways. Just in terms of running co-design sessions, we found that we got richer information by extracting it within the context of an entire experience, rather than asking about the issues as a standalone exercise. We found that involving the people that we're serving through design as participants in the process ensures that we don't reduce people to discrete behaviors that are separated from the context of their lives, their communities, their aspirations, and their value structures. And this type of approach that we took, this co-design approach, this participatory design approach, allowed us to address the root causes of the problem rather than the symptoms, therefore leading us to design better experiences and ultimately drive better outcomes. Beyond that, we were also able to establish proof of concept in the lowest possible degree of fidelity, which saved design and development resources. And we were able to identify which resources would drive the most value immediately and prioritize other features for future development. So the final product, a digital one-stop shop where students can get streamlined access to emergency support. We designed what's effectively a Yelp for emergency resources. So real-time resource recommendations because we found that our users had limited bandwidth. Peer-validated crowdsourced resources because we found that our users trusted their peers more than they trusted their college. Students can also apply for up to $500 in times of emergencies. And again, as I mentioned earlier, oftentimes students drop out over a $500 expense. And so this all goes to say that we were so off in our initial sort of perception of the problem because we were so quick to want to identify a problem. And instead, because we decided to take a step back and run these co-design exercises with our users, we let them be the experts. And that kind of got us thinking about how we just generally approach design. We found that we were taking a design with, not for, we were taking a design for, not with approach. And we started thinking about different ways that we could sort of be better about letting students be the experts and bringing students to the table as stakeholders. And we decided to take a step back and rethink our research and design process entirely. And we ultimately ended up implementing what we call an equity-based community design approach. So let's quickly talk about this. Equity work often lacks an intentional and powerful approach to design and creativity, whereas design work often fails to address root causes of inequity, and it's often fraught with implicit bias that we bring to the table as designers. And so right there in the middle, that overlap is where we can sort of look to equity-based community design. There's a tremendous opportunity for us to make the design process more equitable. So design thinking plus equitable practices equals equity-centered design. This means designing for the most affected and marginalized, letting their voices and experiences lead, and acknowledging the barriers to engagement are really critical for this new process. So what are some other reasons that our organization decided to explore equity-based approaches? Design research felt too transactional. The students that we were working with did not normally interact or talk to researchers because they just fundamentally did not trust us. And in order for us to get actionable feedback, we had to be fully invested in the user, in the student, so that it would be less transactional in nature, and we could really dive deep into the students' needs. Beyond that, we needed to build long-term relationships to really see how any financial tool impacts students. One conversation with the student won't tell us much. We really wanted to kind of go beyond the day-to-day and to understand the long-lasting impact of any tool that we were designing. Beyond that, scheduling also gets really complicated really quickly, especially when you're working with college students with limited bandwidth. And we really wanted them to have the seat at the table as stakeholders. So beyond that, we decided that this process really meant that we were going beyond our no harm approach and actually benefiting students. They were learning new skills that could apply to any job. They were able to point to real work experience in a white collar field that could open doors. They boost their confidence, and we were able to financially compensate them. So some of our findings, equity-based design is a process, not a destination. To really achieve equity, we must interrogate our own perspective and challenge our biases. To design for equity, we must design equitably. Designing with means we have to let people be the experts of their lives. And co-creating success means starting with what's working and building from there. I have a few more slides about how your organization can potentially incorporate equity-based community design into your design process, but I am unfortunately out of time. I do have some resources that are included in this deck, so I'd be happy to circulate a link to the deck at the end, or give it to whoever wants it, share it in the Slack channel, if you are interested in kind of learning more about how you can bring an equity-based community design approach to your organization, how you can facilitate co-design sessions, and just generally how you can make your design process more equitable. Even if you aren't designing for financially vulnerable populations, there's an argument that can be made that accessible, inclusive design is good design. That's really the essence of good design. If the products that you're designing and building don't benefit those at the margins, then I think it's time that you take a step back and really fundamentally reevaluate your design process and ways that you can potentially improve it and make it more, broadly beneficial. That's it.